Alrighty, time for another dollar dialogue. And we've mentioned this topic a few times on the podcast, but it's always worth revisiting, and that's building approvals and housing construction. Because as we know, supply and demand is, I think it's fair to say, a little bit out of whack in some areas of Australia. And here to talk to us about this is Shane Garrett, the Chief Economist at Master Builders Australia, one of the preeminent organisations on this topic indeed. Shane, thanks so much for joining us on the Savings Tip Jar. What's the crack?
What's the crack, Harrison? Good on you. Great expression. Thanks very much for inviting me on today, Harrison. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you on, Shane. Thanks so much for joining us. Before we jump into all things building approvals, which I'm really excited to get into, do you have a savings tip for us?
Yeah, I guess for any mortgage holders out there, this is something we've only done recently ourselves, but a lot of people pay their mortgage monthly. One thing to consider if you're in a position to do so is to perhaps pay it fortnightly instead of monthly. Apparently it saves quite a surprisingly large amount of interest over time, and I think some lenders even allow you to pay it weekly if you want to. So that's possibly one for people who are grappling with mortgages at the moment to perhaps think about if it works for them.
That's a great tip, and it's something that we always recommend people do if they can, because as you say, there's 26 fortnights in a year, but only 12 months. So if you do the sums, that's the equivalent of an extra month's paid per year. And personally, it's something that I'm looking at doing. I've been a mortgage holder for a handful of months now, and we're about to become fortnightly payers of the mortgage and hopefully, be debt-free sooner. So we're just launching into this. Thank you.
If you get onto ChatGPT, I'm sure they can work it out to the penny how much you'll save over the term of your mortgage by doing it as well, I think.
There we go, ChatGPT putting financial advisors and mortgage brokers out of a job. Okay, launching into this building approvals stuff. On the surface, it looks like the uptick that we saw last week with the latest release looks like a pretty positive move. But what's your take on it all?
Yeah, it's certainly a positive move, Harrison Brook. So we got figures for the month of September related to home building approvals. And home building approvals really are a monthly count of the amount of new homes that have cleared the final hurdle on paper. And once they've actually received their approval, they can proceed to being built. And they're a very good way of figuring out how many new homes are actually coming on stream across Australia. So what happened in September? Well, in September, the number of home building approvals rose by 12% compared with August. And these figures, of course, they're seasonally adjusted as well. So that's a kind of a meaningful comparison to make. So that's a good result. For detached houses, we got a 4.4% increase compared with August, and that means that September was actually the best month for detached house building approvals in a whole year. That's good on that side. Now, if you look at higher density home building approvals, if it's not a detached house, we call it a higher density home. Approvals on that side saw a much bigger increase. They went up by 23.7% within the month, and that was the best result they had since June. And now, admittedly, approvals on that side of the market do tend to jump around a lot, so it's not unusual to get double-digit moves either up or down in that sense. But, it just means that more new homes are entering to the pipeline, and eventually when they get built, they'll be actually available for real people to live in, and that's important at a time when housing is such a scarce resource. Now, that's just looking at 1 month's data. Now, we have to kind of put this in a deeper context, because the government at the moment has a target. It's called the National Housing Accord, and the government has said that they want 1.2 million new homes created across Australia up to the 5 years, up to June of 2029, I think it is. And what that means is it means that we have to come up with 240,000 new homes per year. Now, how are we doing on that score? Well, on that score, we're not doing too great, to be honest, because we have results for the first year of the Accord, and while we would have liked to have got 240 new home starts during the 24-25 financial year, we actually only got just about 180. So we actually undershot that target by 60,000 homes in its very first year. And that basically means that if we're going to meet the target, we have to get up to target speed, certainly, but then we have to lump that 60,000 deficit from the first year and share it across the remaining 4 years of the Accord. So that means effectively that we need Now we need 255,000 new homes per year over the 4 years remaining in the Accord's term. So that's a really huge ask. Now, if you look at these building approvals figures, they show us that we got 190, just over 191,500 new homes approved over the year to September. That was actually stronger than in the year to September of 2024. It's about 13.7% more homes than we got in the previous 12-month period. And that's good. It's a kind of a fairly decisive step in the right direction. But 191 versus 255 is still a massive gap. And what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to close that gap very quickly. And it's going to be really tricky because people in the industry know that there's a lot of obstacles in our way when it comes to increasing our production of new homes at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, that 60,000 shortfall, it sounds like a large number, but in context, that's the size of probably a small city in Australia.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It would be the size of a small city. Yeah, you'd have there'd be cities that would have fewer homes than 60,000. I'd well imagine, Brooke.
Absolutely. I think I grew up in one actually in regional Victoria. But so you mentioned obstacles in the way of getting that number up to where it needs to be. What would be solutions to those obstacles? I've heard that cutting red tape is something that a lot of experts, and I think yourself, has suggested could help bridge that gap. What else could we see that might help the construction industry get there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're certainly right about cutting red tape. That'll make it less expensive and more quick to deliver more of the new homes we need. But there's other things as well, because the ingredients of every new home include lots of different things. We have building materials like timber, steel, concrete, cement. All of those things goes into a new home. But we also have labor, people. We need people to do the work. At the moment, even though the construction workforce is pretty much the biggest it's ever been, it's still not nearly big enough to be able to deliver all of the work that's required of our industry over the next number of years. So how do we deal with that problem? The first thing we have to do is we have to stop our workforce from actually getting smaller. We have to encourage people who are thinking of leaving. And the main reason people leave our workforce is just down to retirement, simply. If we can come up with ways to encourage people who are thinking of retiring, or people who are transitioning from going full-time to thinking of going part-time, if we can convince those people to go full-time for a bit longer, even if it's only an extra year or two, that would make some difference to the equation. But crucially, we also have to get more people to come into the industry. And there's really only two sources of new workers in our industry. We can encourage more apprentices to take up apprenticeships. The problem there is apprenticeships are a bit of a slow burn in terms of boosting our workforce, because an apprentice that starts today won't really be tooled up and trained up until 4 years' time. So it really takes at least 4 years for us to reap the benefits of improved apprentice engagement today. The other issue we have is that, we can look to apprentices, but we'll be waiting 4 years for an apprentice to really show up in terms of our industry's productive potential. The other way is to get workers in from overseas. There are lots of shortages right around the world at the moment. In Ireland, where I'm originally from, the Irish government are actually geo-targeting Irish people living in Australia who listen to Irish radio stations with ads urging them to come back from Australia to help build Ireland. But if Australia's visa system was made a little simpler in terms of allowing building businesses here in Australia to bring workers in from overseas, that will be another quicker way to deal with the workforce shortages that we face at the moment. And that's one of them.
Sure. Yeah, it's one of those big, I guess, prickly topics, because immigration, I think, globally, I imagine even in the UK and Ireland as well, it's kind of this seen as like this necessary evil. A lot of people are blaming it for all their woes, but you need people to fill in those skills shortages, and it seems like one of the biggest skills shortages is skilled labor, especially in Australia, to build these homes. They're often seen as like in a bit of a negative light. There's a lot of demand for housing, but then you also need them to build their houses. Is the government currently and correctly targeting this skilled migration? Are are they allowing like visa holders to come in like with a trade and start contributing to this housing supply fix?
Yeah, it's a good way of describing it, because immigration, without doubt, does add to demand for housing. Policy should allow immigration to add to the supply of housing a bit better by making it easier for skilled construction workers to make themselves available to the community. At the moment, it isn't easy to do that, to be honest. There's all sorts of sort of obstacles, both financial and non-financial, to employers being able to do that. It's just really quite difficult for people in our industry to bring workers in from overseas. There's all sorts of administrative tick boxes to be checked off in the first instance. But then there's just the sheer financial cost of visas and visa application fees. They're often well over 10,000 in some cases. And that again is another thing which will dissuade people who could contribute to making more homes available to Australia from actually coming over here and being able to offer their work.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's something that it's a really interesting topic, and it's really nuanced, and could make a really big difference to the construction industry in particular. I wanted to ask you, Shane, so the latest uptick you mentioned in the building approvals has been largely driven by higher density housing, so apartments, units, townhouses, that sort of thing. Some recent data from Cotality found that the premium between houses and units, the price premium, is around 50% now. So if you're looking to buy a unit and maybe you think, oh, but it'd actually be nice to have a house, you're probably looking at spending about 50% more to get into a house. And that's up from about 20% 5 years ago. So with obviously apartments are easier to build and easier to get off the ground, and it's something that Housing Accord is looking at, is getting more units on the market. Is there a change in our housing culture or housing expectations that need to happen to get more Australians into apartments?
Yeah, I think so. I like the price premium is interesting, and it just goes to show that if we want to deliver affordable homes, the most realistic option we have is to concentrate on apartment building. Apartment building is as well as being less expensive than it is with detached houses. It is also something, once you get it going, it can allow you to deliver large amounts of new housing stock in relatively short periods of time. And we did that quite well in the last decade, kind of up to around, especially if you look at the 5 years up to around 2018, we delivered over 1.1 million homes across Australia in that 5 year period. The Housing Accord wants 1.2 million homes over the next 5 year period. And that period, 5 years to 2018, that was the strongest 5 year period on record for new home building in Australia. So how do we allow ourselves to deliver more of the higher density homes that realistically provide much of the solution? A lot of it comes down to planning. Like in a lot of parts of Sydney, Melbourne and other cities, there are very onerous restrictions on how high new residential buildings can actually be. Those are fairly unbreakable rules at the moment. There was a report out last week from the Grattan Institute, which is a very centrist and well-regarded think tank, a very good think tank. They did some number crunching and found that if we were to make improvements to things like planning and the approvals process and a few other things as well, they reckon that the annual amount of new home building in Australia could actually be increased by about 67,000 per year. And if we were able to do that, and if we were able to adopt some of the recommendations which they've made in the report they put out last week, that would bring us a huge step closer to being able to deliver on the housing needs that we have.
It's a very nuanced debate and topic, Shane. There's no silver bullet. And I think it looks like the government's going to fall short of its 1.2 million target. But, even if they go within a cooee of that, I think, we can praise them at least for having a go. Just finally, you're not motivated to take Ireland up on the call to head back to the mother country and help out the construction industry there?
If they could change the climate, maybe I'd consider it.
Oh, gee, like with the way Melbourne's been, it's been very Irish indeed lately.
So I've heard. Canberra's been the same, I have to say, during my homesickness.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. It's been great to talk to you, Shane, and to pick your brain on building approvals. As I think I mentioned earlier in the episode, it's such an important part of our housing market, and to improve affordability, which is such a burden on so many Australians right now, looking to get into the market and looking to move around the market. So it's been great to hear the latest on what's happening and to pick your brain on what we can do to maybe get a little bit closer to what that government is aiming for. Thanks so much for coming on, Shane. It's been great.
Thanks so much indeed. It's been great to talk to you, Brooke and Harrison. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.